The council chamber fell silent when the human child walked through the obsidian doors alone. No escort, no translator, just small footsteps echoing across stone that had witnessed 3,000 years of imperial judgment. The royal guard stationed along the walls didn't move, but every sensory organ locked onto the tiny figure crossing the vast floor toward the crystalline throne. Protocol dictated immediate removal. Ancient law forbade unsanctioned entry, yet Captain Veshra's hand hovered over her pulse weapon without drawing it, because something felt profoundly wrong about this moment in a way that made her instincts scream caution rather than action. The child couldn't have been more than 7 solar cycles old by human standards. Dark hair, simple gray clothing, bare feet leaving faint prints on polished black stone. The Queen of the Vast Reaches sat motionless on her throne, compound eyes reflecting prismatic light as she observed this unprecedented breach. Her thorax remained perfectly still, wings folded in the exact position of imperial contemplation that every subject across 47 star systems knew meant she was calculating probabilities and potential threats. The Prime Council standing beside the throne shifted his weight, mandibles clicking in a pattern that asked permission to speak. The Queen's antenna twitched once, silence maintained. The child stopped at the base of the throne platform, exactly where ambassadors and warlords had stood to plead their cases or accept their sentences, small hands clasped behind their back, head tilted upward to meet the Queen's gaze without flinching, without the trembling that even the most decorated generals displayed when summoned to this chamber. Captain Veshra's secondary eyes tracked the child's vitals through thermal signature analysis. Heart rate elevated but steady, no signs of coercion drugs. No neural implants broadcasting instructions. Respiratory pattern showed focus rather than fear. This made no sense. Humans feared the collective. Everyone feared the collective. It was mathematical certainty, biological imperative, political reality. The Queen's voice resonated through the chamber with harmonic frequencies that could shatter bone if she chose to modulate them toward weaponization. Identify yourself, small human. Explain how you entered my palace. Explain why you draw breath instead of being atomized by perimeter defenses. Each word carried weight that pressed against eardrums and chest cavities. The child didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't display any of the submission reflexes that 3 millennia of collective expansion had taught every species to perform instinctively. My name is Maya Chen. The voice was clear, unhurried, with that peculiar human quality of emotional resonance that made their communications so inefficient, yet so unsettlingly effective. I came through the maintenance tunnels beneath the Western Gardens. Your security drones don't scan for biological signatures under 40 kilograms in restricted infrastructure zones. They should. That's a vulnerability someone worse than me could exploit. The Prime Council's mandibles spread wide in shock. The Royal Guard tensed. Captain Veshra felt her combat algorithms activating, running scenarios for securing the child without causing diplomatic incident with Earth's fragile coalition government. The Queen's wings unfurled slightly, a gesture that in collective body language meant lethal interest. You presume to critique my security while trespassing in my throne room. You understand this earns execution under 17 different statutes. Not a question. Statement of fact. The child nodded once, sharp and decisive like a soldier acknowledging orders. I understand. But you're going to want to hear what I have to say before you make that decision. It concerns the Devourers, the real reason they're coming to this sector, the reason your fleets can't stop them. Silence crashed through the chamber like a shockwave. The Devourers were classified intelligence, known only to the Queen's inner council and the highest military commanders. This human child shouldn't possess that knowledge. Earth's government had been deliberately excluded from strategic briefings about the extragalactic threat specifically to prevent panic and maintain social order. Captain Veshra's hand finally closed on her weapon, not drawing but ready. The Queen remained absolutely motionless for 3 full seconds, a duration that felt like hours in the pressurized atmosphere of mounting tension. Speak, the Queen commanded, and the single word carried frequencies that made the walls vibrate. The child took a breath, and Captain Veshra noticed something she'd missed initially. The small human's left hand bore faint scarring, the distinctive pattern of Devourer energy weapon exposure, tissue damage that human medical technology couldn't fully repair, which meant this child had encountered them, had survived. The statistical impossibility of that survival made Veshra's tactical computer generate error notifications. Maya's next words came steady and cold, with a certainty that no 7-year-old should possess. They're not invading. They're running. Something is chasing them across galaxies, and they're fleeing through our space because we're in the way. Your fleets keep trying to fight them like an invasion force, but they're refugees with no choice but to destroy anything blocking their escape route. And the thing chasing them is 3 months behind their vanguard. When it arrives, everything we know ends unless we stop preparing for the wrong war. The Queen leaned forward on her throne, and for the first time in Captain Veshra's 15-year service, she saw something she'd never witnessed in her sovereign. The faintest tremor in those ancient compound eyes. Not fear, not yet, but the recognition that the universe had just shifted in a direction that invalidated every strategic calculation. The child stood waiting, small and impossibly calm, while empires hung in the balance of whatever came next. The Queen's voice dropped to frequencies so low they bypassed ears and resonated directly in bone marrow. "How do you possess this intelligence, Maya Chen of Earth?" The child's response carried weight that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Because I've seen it. Because I was there when they destroyed my colony. Because the devourer who burned my hand didn't kill me when it had the chance, and I was conscious enough to hear what it transmitted to its fleet before it died, or terrified. Your Majesty, I need you to understand something that your species seems unable to process. The devourers are afraid, and if something scares them that badly, we should all be asking the right question." Captain Veshra watched the Queen's antennae lock into position that signaled absolute focus. The ruler of 47 star systems, commander of fleets that had crushed rebellions and assimilated entire civilizations, leaned forward with an intensity that made the air itself feel heavier. When she spoke, her voice carried genuine curiosity wrapped in lethal authority. "What question should we be asking, small human?" Maya Chen met those ancient compound eyes without wavering, and the answer fell into the throne room like a stone into still water, sending ripples that would reshape everything. "Why aren't you afraid?" The words hung in the air with implications that made Captain Veshra's combat instincts surge. The question wasn't directed at the Queen. It was directed at humanity, at the species that had barely achieved interstellar travel, that commanded no great fleets, that held no strategic territories, that by every logical measure should be the most terrified civilization in known space. Yet here stood this child, scarred by weapons that vaporized collective warships, speaking with absolute calm about extinction-level threats while the greatest military power in the galaxy prepared defensive positions. The Queen rose from her throne, and the movement sent every guard in the chamber into heightened alertness. She descended the platform steps with deliberate grace, each footfall precise and measured. When she reached the base, she stood before Maya, towering over the small human like a living monument to imperial power. Captain Veshra's weapon came halfway out of its holster before the Queen's antenna flicked a stand-down command. The ruler of the vast reaches lowered herself into a crouch, bringing her eyes level with the child's, close enough that her mandibles could snap forward and end this unprecedented encounter in an instant. "Answer your own question, Maya Chen," the Queen said, her voice modulated to frequencies meant for private conversation despite the full council chamber bearing witness. "Why is your species not paralyzed by the terror that drives the devourers through our space? Why do you stand in my throne room delivering intelligence that should break your fragile mind? What makes humans different?" The question carried genuine need to understand, as if the answer might contain strategic value beyond mere curiosity. The child considered the question with a seriousness that seemed to age her features. When she spoke, her words came measured and thoughtful.
"We're afraid. We're absolutely terrified."
"Every human who knows what's coming has nightmares about it. Fear isn't the absence of terror, Your Majesty. It's what you do while you're scared." She paused, and something shifted in her expression, hardening into resolution that Captain Veshra had seen in veteran soldiers before suicide missions. "My parents died on that colony. 300,000 people turned to ash in 17 minutes. I hid in a water recycling tank and listened to them scream. I was afraid then. I'm afraid now, but being afraid doesn't mean being helpless." The Queen's antennae quivered, processing implications. "The devourers run because they believe survival through flight is possible. You suggest humanity chooses a different calculation." Not a question, but Maya nodded anyway. "We choose to fight not because we're brave, but because running means dying slowly instead of quickly. At least fighting gives us variables we can control. The devourers are faster than us, stronger than us, more advanced than us. And they're running, which means whatever is chasing them can't be fought conventionally. So we need to stop thinking conventionally." The Prime Council stepped forward, breaking protocol, his voice carrying alarm. "Right, Majesty, this human child cannot possibly have tactical intelligence that our analysis networks haven't already processed. She describes hypothesis without foundation." The Queen's antenna flicked dismissal without breaking eye contact with Maya. "Continue, small human. What unconventional approach do you propose?" Maya's scarred hand came up, fingers spreading to display the branching patterns of energy weapon damage. The devourer that burned me was dying. Its weapon had overloaded, caught in a feedback loop from hitting our colony's power core. In its final transmission, it didn't report tactical data. It transmitted emotion. Raw, unprocessed terror about what was following them. But it also transmitted something else. Defiance. Anger that it was being hunted. Which means the thing chasing them isn't invincible. It can be hurt. It can be resisted. The Devourers just don't know how, because they've never encountered anything they couldn't outrun. Captain Veshra felt her tactical computer running probability cascades, trying to extrapolate strategic implications.
The Queen remained crouched before the child, and when she spoke, her voice carried resonances that indicated her entire cognitive architecture was realigning around new information.
You propose we cease defensive operations and instead study our enemy's enemy?
Use the Devourer's flight path to map the pursuing entity's capabilities. Identify weaknesses through observed pattern behavior. Maya nodded firmly. And we need to do it fast, because in 3 months we won't have time to analyze anything. We'll just have time to die or survive based on decisions we make right now. The Queen stood, her full height, casting shadow across the small human. The silence stretched for 10 seconds that felt infinite. Then she turned to her Prime Council, and her voice carried harmonic frequencies that indicated absolute command priority. Initiate Protocol Void 7. Recall all forward fleets to defensive perimeter. Redirect deep space reconnaissance assets to track Devourer fleet movements with predictive modeling focus. I want behavioral analysis, not tactical assessment. What drives them? What terrifies them? What they avoid? She turned back to Maya, head tilting in the collective gesture of acknowledgement between equals. You will remain in the palace as advisory consultant. Captain Veshra will serve as your security detail and liaison. Veshra stepped forward instantly, weapon holstered, posture shifting to protective formation. Maya looked up at the Queen with expression that mixed relief and residual fear and something else that the captain couldn't quite identify. Hope, perhaps, or determination. The child spoke quietly. You haven't asked the second question yet, Your Majesty. The Queen's antennae perked with renewed interest. What question? Maya's voice carried weight beyond her years. Why I came here alone, instead of letting Earth's government deliver this information through proper diplomatic channels. The Queen considered this, compound eyes reflecting light in patterns that indicated high-level processing. Because human bureaucracy would delay action until the threat arrived. Because your government would prioritize political considerations over survival imperatives. Because you calculated that direct approach, despite personal risk, offered highest probability of immediate response. Maya shook her head slowly. Those are all true, but that's not the real reason. She took a breath, and Captain Veshra saw the child's composure crack slightly, revealing the terrified survivor beneath the calm exterior. I came because I needed to know if the most powerful being in known space would listen to a human child, if she would hear truth from someone with nothing to offer except what she witnessed. Because if you wouldn't listen to me, then we're all already dead and nothing else matters. The statement hung in the air with brutal honesty that bypassed diplomatic language and struck at fundamental truth. The Queen remained motionless for a long moment. Then her mandibles spread in the collective expression that approximated a smile, but carried far more complex emotional resonance. You tested whether power and wisdom remained aligned in my reign. Whether I had become so insulated by hierarchy that critical intelligence from unexpected sources would be dismissed. She turned toward the assembled council, her voice rising to fill the entire chamber. Let this moment be recorded in Imperial archives. A human child breached our security, delivered strategic intelligence, and challenged our fundamental tactical assumptions. Not through military force, not through diplomatic pressure, but through clarity of purpose and refusal to accept conventional limitations. She looked back at Maya, and her next words carried frequencies reserved for addressing honored warriors. You asked why I should not be afraid, small human. Having met you, I understand now that fear is not the question. The question is what we become while afraid. The Devourers became refugees. The collective has become defensive, but humanity appears to become dangerously creative. The Queen's antennae swept toward Captain Veshra. Take Maya Chen to the Tactical Analysis Center. Grant her access to all Devourer encounter data. I want her perspectives integrated into strategic planning immediately. As Veshra moved to escort the child from the throne room, the Queen's voice stopped them both. Maya Chen of Earth. You came seeking my attention. You have it. But understand this clearly. If your intelligence proves false, if this approach leads to catastrophic failure, I will hold you personally accountable regardless of your age or species. Do you accept this responsibility?
The child turned back, meeting those ancient compound eyes one final time, and her response came without hesitation. I accept. But, Your Majesty, I have one request in exchange for the risk I'm taking by helping you.
The audacity of negotiating with the Queen of the Vast Reaches made several council members emit distress pheromones. The Queen's antennae locked into position, indicating lethal focus. You presume significantly, small human. What request? Maya's voice remained steady, despite the weight of Imperial attention. When we fight this thing, whatever it is, I want to be there. I want to see it die for what it did to my family, to my home. I want to watch it burn the way it burned them. The rawness of the request, the unveiled hatred and need for vengeance, made it impossible to dismiss as childish bravado. The Queen considered this with visible deliberation. You asked to participate in military operations against an entity that drives the Devourers before it in terror. You request to face something that may be unkillable by conventional means. You demand the right to personal vengeance against a force we do not yet understand. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried approval that surprised everyone present. Request granted, with conditions. You will undergo tactical training. You will follow military protocol. You will accept that vengeance is secondary to survival. But when we face this threat, Maya Chen, you will stand with us. Because anyone brave enough or foolish enough to walk into my throne room alone has earned the right to face their nightmares directly. Captain Veshra guided Maya toward the chamber exit, her mind racing with implications of everything that had just transpired. Behind them, the Queen was already issuing commands that would reshape the collective's entire strategic posture. As they passed through the obsidian doors, Maya looked up at her new guard and spoke quietly. She's still afraid. I can see it in how her antennae move. But she's channeling it into action instead of paralysis. Veshra's mandibles clicked in acknowledgement. As are you, small human. As are you. The door sealed behind them and the palace began transforming from seat of stable imperial power into war command center, preparing for a threat beyond previous comprehension. In the tactical analysis wing, Maya stood before holographic displays showing Devourer fleet movements across 3 months of data. Her scarred hand traced patterns in the light, identifying behavioral anomalies that collective analysts had categorized as random variation. There, she said, pointing to a cluster of trajectory deviations. They change course every time they approach this spatial coordinate range. Not because of obstacles. They're avoiding something, even though it adds weeks to their flight path. Whatever is chasing them must be concentrated in these regions. The senior analyst, a veteran of 40 campaigns, studied the data with newfound attention. If accurate, this suggests the pursuing entity operates from fixed territorial positions rather than mobile pursuit. Fundamentally different strategic paradigm. Maya nodded, her young face intense with concentration, which means it's not chasing them continuously. It's driving them towards something, like herding prey into a killing ground. The implications crashed through the analysis center like a shockwave. Captain Veshra watched the child interact with military strategists 3 times her age, providing insights that recontextualized months of collected intelligence. Over the following days, Maya became the focal point of tactical planning sessions that ran through sleep cycles and ignored standard protocol. The Queen attended several personally, observing as the human child identified patterns that collective cognitive architecture had processed as noise. During one such session, Maya suddenly froze while examining deep space reconnaissance footage. Stop. Go back. There. The image froze on what appeared to be empty space between star systems. The Devourers passed through this region 6 weeks ago. Your sensors recorded standard vacuum readings, but look at the background stellar positions. She enhanced the image, comparing it to archived star charts. 3 stars have shifted position by 0.007 degrees. That's impossible over 6 weeks unless something with massive gravitational influence passed through. The Queen leaned forward, her full attention locked on the display. Gravitational lensing effect from the pursuing entity. It possesses mass sufficient to bend space-time detectably. She turned to her chief scientist. Can we extrapolate size and velocity? The scientist worked frantically, incorporating Maya's observation into computational models. When the results displayed, the entire room fell silent. The pursuing entity measured approximately 12,000 kilometers in diameter, moving at 0.3 light speed, with gravitational signature consistent with collapsed stellar mass. A mobile black hole, somehow directed and controlled, consuming everything in its path. Maya stared at the data, her scarred hand trembling slightly. The Devourers aren't running from an enemy. They're running from a weapon. Someone is using a weaponized singularity to cleanse this region of space. The Queen's antennae locked into position, indicating existential recalculation.
If this analysis is accurate, conventional resistance is mathematically impossible. We cannot fight a black hole. We cannot outrun it. We can only attempt to deflect its course or destroy whatever intelligence controls its trajectory. She turned to Maya with an expression that mixed respect and something approaching desperation. You have given us understanding of the threat. Now tell me, small human, do you have any theory for how to survive it? 7-year-old human child, scarred and orphaned, standing before the greatest military power in known space, being asked to solve an impossible problem. Maya was quiet for a long moment, staring at the holographic representation of the approaching singularity. When she spoke, her voice carried the same calm determination that had brought her to the throne room. We can't fight it. But we don't have to. We just need to change its vector by 0.001 degrees. At its current velocity, that small deflection would alter its course enough to miss every inhabited system in this sector. She looked up at the Queen. The question is what has enough mass and force to nudge a weaponized black hole? The chief scientist's mandibles clicked rapidly in calculation. Coordinated detonation of stellar cores. If we could destabilize 3 or 4 stars along its approach vector, the combined shockwave might generate sufficient force for minimal course correction. The Queen's antennae swept toward her military command. Survey all uninhabited star systems along projected approach vector. Identify candidates for induced nova. Calculate exact timing and yield requirements. She turned back to Maya. This solution requires sacrificing multiple star systems, rendering entire regions of space uninhabitable for millennia. Are you prepared to accept this consequence? Yes, dead space is better than dead everything. The brutal pragmatism of that answer seemed to settle something in the Queen's decision matrix. Over the next weeks, the collective mobilized resources on a scale unprecedented even during the expansion wars, entire fleets repositioned to uninhabited systems. Scientific vessels deployed stellar manipulation devices that had existed only as theoretical weapons, and through it all, Maya Chen remained at the center of tactical planning, her unique perspective bridging gaps between collective strategic thinking and human adaptability. The Devourers continued their desperate flight through collective space, and now instead of engaging them, collective forces monitored their trajectory to refine predictions about the pursuing singularity. The strategy was insane by conventional doctrine, letting an enemy fleet pass unopposed while preparing to destroy friendly star systems. But Maya's logic was undeniable. The Devourers were symptoms, not the disease. And as Captain Veshra watched the child work alongside the greatest military minds in 47 systems, she understood why the Queen had listened. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or numbers. It was their capacity to accept terrible choices without paralysis. 3 weeks before projected singularity arrival, Maya stood with the Queen in the Strategic Command Center, watching displays that showed final preparations across 7 star systems. The detonation sequence is locked, the Queen said, her voice carrying harmonics of controlled tension. When the singularity reaches coordinate threshold 7, we will trigger simultaneous stellar destabilization. The combined force will deflect its course by 0.003 degrees, sufficient to spare all inhabited worlds. And she turned to Maya. You asked to witness the death of what destroyed your family. The singularity itself we cannot kill. But the intelligence controlling it will be aboard a command vessel somewhere in its gravitational shadow. Our deep reconnaissance has identified the probable location. Maya's expression hardened. I want to be there when you destroy it. The Queen's antennae flicked acknowledgement. Captain Veshra will take you aboard the Strike Force flagship. You have earned the right to witness this ending. The days before the operation felt simultaneously endless and too brief. Maya trained with collective soldiers, learning to operate in zero gravity, familiarizing herself with combat protocols she was too young to fully participate in but old enough to understand. The night before deployment, the Queen summoned her to the throne room one final time. They stood alone in the vast chamber, sovereign and child, separated by species and power but united by shared purpose. I asked you once why you were not afraid, the Queen said quietly. But I have learned the question was flawed. You are afraid. Fear drives your every action. What makes you remarkable is your refusal to let fear choose your direction. She reached out with one primary limb, the gesture oddly gentle for such a formidable being. When this is over, regardless of outcome, you will have a place in the collective, as advisor, as warrior, as whatever you choose to become. This I promise you. Maya looked up at those ancient compound eyes and felt something break inside her, the wall she'd built around her grief cracking under the weight of acknowledgement and acceptance. I just want them to not have died for nothing, she whispered, and for the first time since entering the palace, she sounded like the terrified child she actually was. The Queen's response carried harmonics reserved for mourning rituals. They did not. You have ensured that. Now you will ensure that no one else's family suffers the same fate. That is worthy memorial. The strike force deployed 30 hours before the Singularity reached the detonation threshold. Maya stood on the flagship's observation deck in a specially sized combat suit, watching stars slide past at faster-than-light velocity. Captain Veshra stood beside her, weapon ready, protective instincts fully engaged despite the absurdity of a child on a military vessel heading toward a weaponized black hole. You should be afraid, Veshra said quietly. Maya's scarred hand pressed against the transparent hull. I am. But I'm more angry than afraid. And anger is easier to aim. The command vessel controlling the Singularity appeared on sensors exactly where collective intelligence had predicted. It was massive, built from technology that predated current galactic civilizations, and it was completely unaware of the strike force approaching from its sensor shadow. The flagship commander's voice resonated through combat channels. All vessels, weapons hot. Target confirmed. Execute on my mark. Maya watched the targeting displays lock onto the ancient vessel, and she thought about her parents, her home, the 300,000 people whose names she'd never know but whose deaths she carried like stones in her chest. Mark, the commander said, and the universe turned white. 73 warships fired simultaneously, concentrated energy weapons converging on a single point. The command vessel's shields flared, held for 3 seconds, then collapsed under sustained bombardment. The hull ruptured. Atmosphere vented. Internal structures tore apart in cascading detonation chains. And then, catastrophically, something inside the vessel destabilized. The Singularity, suddenly without guidance systems, began exhibiting erratic gravitational fluctuations. All ships, emergency retreat, the commander ordered, but Maya couldn't look away from the dying vessel, from the expanding gravitational anomalies, from the proof that even the unkillable could be defeated through sufficient will and precision. The flagship jumped to faster-than-light velocity, escaping the Singularity's pull with seconds to spare. Behind them, the weaponized black hole, no longer controlled, began to collapse in on itself, the exotic matter stabilizing its expansion, degrading without constant management. Within hours, it would evaporate through Hawking radiation, its threat eliminated not through direct destruction but through severing the intelligence that had wielded it. Maya felt Captain Veshra's hand on her shoulder and realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face in the privacy of her helmet. Is it over? She asked, her voice small. Veshra's response carried absolute certainty. The immediate threat is neutralized. The Singularity will dissipate. The Devourers will stop running, and the galaxy will remember that a human child changed the course of extinction through clarity and courage. Maya nodded, unable to speak, feeling the weight of everything she'd carried for months finally beginning to lift. The flagship turned toward home, toward the palace, toward whatever future existed now that the immediate apocalypse had been averted. When they arrived back at the palace 3 days later, the Queen met them personally at the landing bay. She stood at the base of the flagship's ramp as Maya descended on unsteady legs, exhaustion and relief and lingering grief making her stumble. The Queen caught her with surprising gentleness, steadying the small human, and when she spoke her voice carried harmonics that indicated deep respect. You asked why you should not be afraid, Maya Chen of Earth. I have your answer now. Fear is not weakness. Fear is information. What you do with that information determines everything. The Devourers let fear drive them into endless flight. The collective let fear drive us into defensive posture. But you, small human, you let fear drive you toward solutions. Maya looked up at the towering figure, at the ruler of 47 star systems who had listened when no one else would have, and found her voice. I'm still afraid. The Singularity is gone, but whatever civilization built it might send more. The Devourers are still out there. There are probably other threats we haven't discovered yet. The Queen's antennae swept in acknowledgement. Yes, there are always threats. There is always reason for fear, but there is also always choice in how we respond. You have taught the collective something we had forgotten through millennia of dominance, that sometimes the smallest voice carries the most critical message. That protocol must serve wisdom, not replace it. She gestured toward the palace, and Maya walked beside her, Captain Veshra following at respectful distance. As they entered the obsidian doors, Maya remembered walking through them alone weeks ago, terrified and determined, and completely uncertain whether she would survive the encounter. Now she walked beside the Queen as acknowledged advisor, as the human who had saved the galaxy through refusing to accept that fear meant helplessness. The throne room filled with council members and military commanders, all waiting to hear formal assessment of the operation's success. The queen ascended her throne, and Maya stood at its base in the position of honored consultant. When the queen spoke, her voice filled the chamber with absolute authority. The threat has been neutralized. The singularity weapon is destroyed. Our projections indicate complete dissipation within 4 standard days. Inhabited systems are secure. The Devourer fleet, no longer pursued, has altered course away from collective space toward unclaimed regions. This outcome was achieved through strategic innovation provided by our human advisor, Maya Chen, who demonstrated that effective intelligence can originate from any source willing to challenge conventional assumptions. I am therefore establishing new protocol within the collective, the Child Consultant Program, wherein perspectives from developing minds across all member species will be formally integrated into strategic planning. Maya Chen will direct this initiative, ensuring that fear of unconventional thinking never again blinds us to critical solutions. Let it be known across 47 systems that the collective survives not through power alone, but through wisdom to listen regardless of the messenger's stature. The announcement sent ripples through the assembly. A human child given institutional authority within the most powerful government in known space. It was unprecedented. It was radical. It was exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that had saved them all from extinction. Maya felt the weight of new responsibility settling onto shoulders too young to carry it, but she stood straighter anyway, accepting the burden because someone had to, and she'd already proven she could bear impossible weight. In the weeks that followed, Maya worked to establish frameworks for the Child Consultant Program, identifying talented young minds across dozens of species, creating structures that would ensure their perspectives reached decision-makers before crises became catastrophes. She returned to Earth briefly, visiting the memorial site where her colony had stood, placing flowers on ground that had been glass when last she'd seen it. Captain Veshra stood guard while Maya said goodbye to parents whose bodies had never been recovered, to a home that existed now only in memory. "Do you regret it?" Veshra asked quietly as they prepared to depart. "The path you chose."
The responsibility you accepted?
Maya considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "I regret that I had to make these choices, but I don't regret making them. Fear gave me information. Anger gave me direction. Determination gave me results. And now I have purpose instead of just pain." She looked up at the collective warrior who had become friend and protector. "Is that enough?" Veshra's mandibles spread in what Maya had learned to recognize as approval. "It is more than enough, small human. It is everything." They returned to the palace, to the work of building systems that would outlast any individual crisis, and Maya Chen continued growing up in the shadow of the crystalline throne, forever changed by the question she'd asked and the answer she'd forced the galaxy to confront. "Why are you not afraid?" The question echoed through collective space, repeated in strategy sessions and philosophical debates and quiet conversations between parents and children across 47 star systems. And the answer, Maya's answer, became foundation for a new era of adaptive thinking and integrated perspectives. Fear is information. What you do while afraid defines everything. The collective had learned through trial by extinction that power without wisdom leads to blindness, that protocol without flexibility creates vulnerability, that the smallest voice sometimes carries the most critical message. Maya Chen, orphaned human child who walked into the throne room alone and emerged as the advisor who saved the galaxy, stood as living proof that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let fear choose your path. Years later, when historians analyzed the period that became known as the Singularity Crisis, they would point to that moment in the throne room as the inflection point where the collective's trajectory fundamentally shifted. The Queen's question, seeking understanding of human fearlessness, had revealed that humanity's strength lay not in being unafraid but in functioning effectively despite terror. That insight, delivered by a scarred 7-year-old girl with nothing to lose and everything to fight for, had cascaded through strategic doctrine and institutional culture in ways that strengthened the entire galactic community. Maya Chen eventually returned to Earth, her work with the collective complete, carrying scars both visible and hidden, but also carrying knowledge that fear was just another form of data to be processed and utilized. She built schools for children who'd survived trauma similar to hers, teaching them that experiencing terror didn't mean surrendering to it, that the question wasn't whether to be afraid, but what to become while afraid. And sometimes late at night she would look up at stars that remained safely in their positions because a weaponized singularity had been destroyed, because she had refused to accept that being small meant being helpless. The galaxy turned on its ancient paths, threats rising and falling in endless cycles, but the lesson remained carved into collective institutional memory like words on stone. When the next crisis emerged, when new terrors demanded response, Decision makers across 47 systems would remember the human child who walked alone into the throne room and changed everything by asking one perfect question: why are you not afraid? And in that question lay the answer to survival itself. Because fear without action is paralysis. But fear channeled into purpose becomes the force that moves worlds, that deflects singularities, that saves civilizations through clarity of thought and refusal to accept that terror equals defeat. Maya Chen had shown them all that courage was simply fear, that had made a choice, had chosen direction over paralysis, action over surrender, and in making that choice had ensured that the light of countless suns continued burning across the vast reaches of space, untouched by darkness that would have consumed everything if one small voice had chosen silence over speech. If one terrified child had chosen running over standing her ground before the crystalline throne and demanding that power listen to truth regardless of its source, and in that demanding, in that refusal to be dismissed, had given the galaxy its future back, one word, one insight, one impossibly brave moment at a time, until the question, why are you not afraid, became not challenge but recognition, not criticism but celebration of humanity's greatest gift to the stars, the understanding that being afraid was universal but letting fear define you was always, always a choice.